Can I ask you, what is liquid death?
That's a sparkling water.
Wow, what a
I
name.
drink a lot of sparkling water.
It is really good marketing.
It is really good, Mark.
It's
For-
like the punk rock.
For
All right.
Sparkling
for
water.
teens and 20s,
We are live.
we're live.
Yeah.
Testing 1, 2. Everybody.
Yep,
Can you?
good to go. I'm gonna go back in the corner.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we need the minutes? We don't have copies, but read them in the email.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
Good. Welcome to the Board of Equalization and Review of Buncombe County. Thank you, board members, for coming today and for your service to the citizens of Buncombe County. I'd first like to introduce everyone, Dr. Linda Weinert and Blake, Phil Blake. You have a first name as a last name, which is fine. All right. Katrina Leger.
Leaguer, yes.
Leger.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Preston Edwards. And myself, Randall Barnett. The duties of this board can be found in the North Carolina General Statutes 105-322. Our first order of business is to call this proceeding to order. So I call this proceeding to order. Our second order of business is to approve the minutes from March 19th, 2025. Has everyone had a chance to peruse the minutes from March 19th?
I make a motion that the minutes be approved as circulated.
A second.
Motion and second. All those in favor, raise your right hand so they can see us on. All right, it passes. No changes to the minutes. All right, our third, per the North Carolina General Statute of the Board of Equalization and Review must convene to formally review appeals from our citizens that deem to do so during an official appeal period. So I now close the informal appeal period as of April 11th, 2025, and open the formal appeal period to extend until May 16th, 2025. We now open the formal appeal period. Motion of the board that we open the appeal period.
Second that motion?
All those in favor, raise your hand. It passes. We are now open formally. Anyone coming in? I don't see anyone. Okay. Our fourth order of business is to discuss the procedures and standards for appeals policies.
It's live. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Great. So there's two things here I was going to put out for you all. The first one being, we don't have to decide on anything today, just discussion. Like to maybe decide on these things when we get to the adjournment date in mid-May. So the first one would be a schedule of hearing these appeals. Now, can't really set a schedule now because we don't know the total count that we have. When we get to that adjournment date, I'll have a good number for you. So basically what Kurt and I have discussed before about what other boards do, they pick a specific day of the week on a certain week of the month. So like the third Tuesday of every month or something along those lines to hear it. And that way we can publish a notice out in local papers and the public knows our schedule. They don't have to guess of when it is. And they can anticipate taking time off of work, things like that. And it's also good for you all to have that schedule. So
Right. But Tuesday is the same as our
Board of
Board
Commissioners.
of Commissions. We probably shouldn't conflict with them.
Yeah. And there's also,
I think it depends on what Tuesday that you decide to do that. If you do that on if your meeting is like, because the board meets usually the first and third Tuesday of every month. So but if you met the second or fourth Tuesday, that wouldn't necessarily cause a bunch of conflicts for staff.
May I ask, what's the length of time following the formal appeal period and then we schedule the meetings that people have the opportunity to then come before us to be heard? How many weeks or what's the time frame
So-
following?
That depends on the amount of appeals we receive, and it's determined by you all. So the frequency of which you would
It's
have
more-
these meetings, and it's really as needed.
The key is for them to be filing the appeal with you all,
Yeah.
and then you will be essentially getting to the, you will get a big list, and we will, continue to
Yeah.
try to resolve some of those outside, but the ones that we don't would then come before you for a formal hearing.
I just didn't know if there was a predetermined period of time, like 3
No.
months following the
No.
close of the formal appeal period.
The only time thing that you all may want to consider, and I've had this issue because I also advise the Board of Adjustments, which is also a quasi judicial body, is how long do you want your hearings to go? All right, so you're going to pick your day, and ideally you would want to block off and say, let's say that we're going to meet on Thursdays from 12 to 4, and we will try to, I'm
Yeah,
just
no,
saying depending on the amount, because some of the appeals will last 5 minutes and you can get a whole bunch done, and some of them will last a lot longer.
Right.
But what I think you want to avoid is an indefinite meeting period to where you all, because you all to an extent, you're volunteering your time, and you don't want to be here forever. And so that then will also allow staff to kind of set up an agenda to where, we'll try to hear, 7 cases that day.
Yeah.
But if we realize that we can't hear the 7, then we will continue to the next day. But that's something to think about as to how long you all want to be here per day that you're going to meet.
Yeah,
It's
that's a good
usually-
thing to bring up.
It's usually one day a week. We wouldn't double up in the same
So
week.
I will tell you, so the Board of Adjustment, once again, we meet the second Wednesday of every month, and we meet from 12 to 4. In that thing, staff tries to get as many cases that we can realistically hear on the agenda. But sometimes we don't get to sometimes the first case takes up the whole 4 hours. Sometimes it doesn't. It happens. So that's try to work. And also staff will try to work with the agenda to kind of get the easy ones up front.
Mhm.
And so you deal with them first and then have the more complicated
Right.
ones
Yeah. So
a little bit back in the agenda. So you don't have a bunch of people sitting here waiting.
Right.
So that they, and then told, oh, well, we can't get to you today. You have to come back. So we try to
Yeah.
work with the citizens too, because they have to take time out of their day to come.
And I've watched people wait in the queue on the Zoom too.
Mhm.
'Cause
right.
we allow Zoom people.
Right. And part of that too is there's going to be a different time you'd spend on some of the commercial properties can get really complicated. And then you're also going to have business personal property cases, and you'll have just residential real estate cases. So commercials usually take a significantly longer amount of time. So you wouldn't stack a whole meeting up with 5 commercials and 2 residential and a business personal property. So you want to divvy those up. And, part of it too is making sure that the appellant has proper notification too, so they can arrange to be here. So that would be.
But that's it. And then I think the other thing that you're going to want to discuss is how the hearing is going to proceed.
Right.
Because I think that's, the idea is that you all are, when you're hearing an appeal, you're acting in a quasi judicial manner, and you all are essentially acting as judges. So normally what happens is the person filing the appeal would go first. All right. They would present their case. Then staff would go and put on any rebuttal evidence. The person appealing would have a chance to ask staff questions or whatnot. And then after staff's done with its presentation, then the appellant could put on rebuttal evidence if the staff raised something that they didn't know about. That's standard. But there are other times where staff goes or where, it could also be depending on how you want. Staff kind of gives you an overview. So that's really, I think, the biggest decision as to who goes first in the process. And then we will come up with a script for you all,
Right.
at least, the order of it being,
And what I could tell you in the previous meetings was it would be staff would present first. You would call the case up. Staff would present first, And then you would hear from the appellant. And at that point, you would drive the questions to them, and they would ask. You're kind of the conduit for the appellant and the staff. So they don't address each other. They address you, and then you ask the questions or ask them questions.
And then
So-
just like the ones that we've already heard from last year, we would have paperwork. That
Yes,
kind of summarizes what we're going to be hearing.
correct. You'll have a board book that follows the agenda. Yeah.
And that would be another thing to consider in your procedures is, would you want the applicant or the appellant, if they have evidence that they're wanting to present, to get that to you ahead of time versus presenting it at the hearing? We've had that issue, at least with the Board of Adjustments, and we usually request that you get, if you're going to submit documents, especially if somebody's bringing an expert witness, to testify, like an appraiser or something like that, you probably want to see their opinion report ahead of the meeting so that you're not trying to thumb through it and figure it out at the hearing.
Yeah.
I think I would like to see the information prior. I think it's very helpful to
Mhm.
have as much of an informed overview of what's about to be shared. So if there is supplemental information or they've got documentation or anything like that, then I would like to have it before the hearing.
We can put that in your rules of procedure, and then when someone files an appeal, we can let them know that you need to get us any documents, a week before the hearing.
Yeah, we can put that on the website and on the response to their formal appeal.
Any supporting documentation or.
Yes, and we try to get that ahead of time and put it in those books, and we'll continue to try to do that, and we'll push for it. But there's
There's gonna be
there will be some cases
Sure.
where that
There,
happens.
there are going to be exceptions, but I would recommend that you rule on those exceptions on a case-by-case basis as opposed to, kind of letting people do what they want and then trying to sort that out. So,
Yeah, and there are times where you can take in evidence and weigh it for a little bit. And if you can't come up with a decision, you can postpone your decision to the next hearing date, and we can roll it over to another agenda, and make sure the appellant's aware of when you're meeting again, so they have an opportunity to be present during your decision. But you have to make the decision here or in the public meeting.
yeah, and your
And deliberate during
deliberations also are public, so you can't call a closed session. Now, if you needed to ask legal advice or had a legal question, you could ask for a closed session, and then the board's attorney, probably being me, could provide you with legal advice. But deliberating about, why you're in favor of granting the appeal or denying the appeal, that would need to be done in public.
Any questions about any of that? And if you have any questions, you can email the whole group, and also we can discuss it in that next meeting as well in May. But as far as the frequency goes, you don't have to have the decision today or the date, but that's something that is a great rule of thumb that other boards adhere to, and it's recommended by DOR to pick a day of the week and a certain week of the month.
And because then you don't have to advertise, we advertise once and say, you all are going to meet the second Thursday at 12 o'clock at this location. And everybody knows that. So unless you're going to deviate from that schedule, you're good. In addition, if you have a regularly scheduled meeting and there's nothing on that, we can always cancel that meeting.
Right.
So that it's not like you have to meet if there's nothing to meet on. So that would be the other thing too. It just allows for a little more flexibility.
Yeah, and this year's not a non-reappraisal year, and we currently we have a very low number of appeals right now. We have around a little over 100, so there's not that many to hear, and they're being settled, and that number's dwindling down. Of course, there could still be some more come in. We're pushing folks to appeal. We're trying to get that message out there, so more will come in. But in mid-May, I'll have that number. Now, in the next year reappraisal, there will be a significant jump. So the frequency of the meetings, you might want to adjust it, but as long as we have proper notice and a plan for it, it'll be okay. And when we run out of appeals to hear, that's when we're done and we'll cancel the rest of the meetings. And anyway, so Kurt, I have a question for Kurt. So if we do so while they're thinking of a date, so can we go back and forth about that via email, or what would we need to decide? Can we put a poll out there of what day of the week and what week of the month they would prefer, and then just vote on that in the next meeting?
Yes, I think what you want to avoid, or where the press tends to make an issue out of the email and stuff, is when you are deliberating about things via email, because they cannot be present during your deliberations. But I think sending out a poll and asking for a response would be perfectly acceptable. And then you all vote in an open meeting as to when you're going to do that. So yes, I think that is okay and would not
Okay.
be a violation of the open meetings law.
Okay, so that's what we'll do. It'll be, just a specific what week of the month and what day of that week would you all prefer, kind of like the ones we've been doing, and then we can vote on that in the next meeting.
You said county commissioners were first and third?
Yes.
Yeah, the first and third, and then then the board of it, not that it necessarily affects you, but it would affect my department. It does. The Board of Adjustments meets the second Wednesday of every month. So those are really the big,
We will
The big
probably avoid
ones.
Wednesdays.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So, we don't have any other questions about that. I had one other item that I wanted to just bring up for y'all to discuss, and it's procedures or rules around specifically late list penalties. So those can get that's what we heard in our previous meeting, and as you can tell, those can be vastly different. So one of the things that the appeals manual recommends is set rules if your board wants to do that. There are boards in North Carolina that have rules around it. Majority of those rules are they typically deny them flat out. Late's late unless the assessor's office made an error. We say we received it late, but that appellant has a postmark envelope where that did not occur. They were on time. Or there's an electronic submission and email, and then there's proof of that. So there's a lot of counties that actually have that rule. They don't hear them. Some counties don't. A lot of counties don't have rules. So there's no set rule of thumb there, but you do have the authority to set that, to take that decision really not totally off the table, because you need to determine whether or not our office made an error or were unfair to the appellant. But that would kind of help with, the back and forth in that scenario, and get you back in the frame of mind of worrying more about appraised value of properties and things like that. So, Kurt, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I would just think though that if you do make a rule or something like that, you're kind of stuck with that. So I mean, there's kind of the give and take of having a more flexible dealing with every situation on a case by case basis. But by doing that, it's more timely, or it's more time consuming, and that, whereas if you as opposed to having some set rules, I think what probably I would do is see what some other of our peer counties are doing and maybe present those and let them see if any of those sound like a good idea to you or not, or if we come up with anything. But
What's the history been of this
Yeah.
board?
Did any of the rules from last year roll over to this year?
Well, they didn't have, to my knowledge, that board did not have any set rules that they voted on. Now, typically, they did not side with the appellant on late list penalties. I can only think of one, and I can't remember the exact scenario as to why they sided with it. I'd be speculating. It's my memory right now. I can't really remember that, but it was years ago. But a lot of counties that have the rule, and that's the trouble with it, is the DOR does not guide you on what to do on it. They say you can do it, but they don't say you should do it, and these are the ones that do it, and this is how they do it. So everyone does it a little differently. Mecklenburg had at one point in time, I don't know if they still do, has a rule where they forgive it the first time around, and then the second time around, but not the third time around. So things like that. So there's different kinds of approaches you can take to it. But the counties that do have rules, the majority that I have heard of that do have it are cut and dry, yes, no. Like if it's late, it's late. And mainly they do that because they're thinking about everyone that's taken their time and submitted their listing on time and followed the policies and the rules that are out there. So that's the main reason there's a rule, it's typically late. If it's late, it's late, no matter what. So you're not the final decision here too. They can also take it to the PTC. So we always remember that after you make a ruling is, okay, it can always go to Raleigh.
The buck doesn't have to stop here.
It does not. There's always other options. So that's kind of what I wanted to get out there. But is there anything that we can provide you all in the meantime or in the next meeting to help you with that? Or is anybody interested in going further with that?
Would we be planning to meet maybe twice a month? Would we be doing twice a month meetings?
Well, I think you would hear the number from me mid-May. I can actually update you before that upcoming meeting and say, this is how many appeals we have to get you all to think about, well, we'll probably hear 4 or 5 every meeting, maybe more than that, though most of them will be residential appeals. There's some commercial out there. And from what I've heard, they could be vast majority of those getting settled. So it'd be difficult for me to tell you the frequency right now.
But the late appeals would be something completely different and in addition to what
Real
areas?
estate.
Yeah.
Yes. Late list penalties. Thank you, Kurt. Late list penalties are business personal property and individual. So primarily business personal property. So that listing period's happening now, and you'll probably hear those appeals more so in the fall.
So if we decided not to have that rule and we did hear these, what we're opening ourselves up to is to hear some cases that were maybe valid, like we heard one, we actually halfway sided with other time. But most of the time we would be just rejecting it, probably just because there wasn't any good reason. So it's hard to make that decision not knowing how many, because you don't want to just blanket tell somebody if they've got a really, really good excuse and they owe a whole lot of money. But at the same time, it seems like it makes sense to make a rule.
Yeah.
That you just don't hear them. I don't know.
Yeah. The late listing is, from my experiences, there's a lot of gray area in there.
Yeah.
And sometimes that gray area produces inequities in the system because, businesses could be going through that same situation, but they still listed on time. And this one didn't. It made it here and got a break for it.
Right.
So that's something to think about. And that's what I wanted to bring up to just for discussion. They can typically be one of the more difficult kind of hearings to have. So.
But we could go ahead and discuss what everyone's favorite day of the week is.
My
Friday
favorite day of the
at
week
5
is Saturday.
Yes, I'm
I
a
was
Phil.
gonna say
Well-
for a meeting.
Yeah.
Personal
time, right.
For being away from your family for 3 or 4 hours.
Family and work.
Or
Yeah.
work, work for
Um,
3 or 4 hours.
This may not be everybody else's favorite. Mondays tend to be my least busy day. I like Mondays. I can make Tuesdays work. Feels like it gets busier as the week
Yes,
goes on.
That's
That's
that
how
is
it,
true.
I
That
mean,
is how
that's-
it goes.
So Monday or Tuesday are kind of my preference, but also
Does the
I'm in real
public
estate, so
does the
nothing
public
really-
mind Mondays?
nothing's
I don't think we asked them.
I mean,
I don't, Tip, the thing is, I think as long as you have a regular set schedule and
They
tell the
don't have-
public, hey, if you can't make it to this meeting, there's come back in 2 weeks, the next following Monday, we're meeting into, so we can fit you into that one. And then we could find somebody else to take their place on that.
Yeah,
I think
So,
it's more critical to have it set, and then people can plan accordingly.
yeah. As long as you,
And then it allows us, based on the number, we can determine the frequency. Is it once a month or twice a month? If
right.
there's more, but if there's less, then we just do it the once a month and
Right.
set it. It's more
I would
simple
say-
once we kind of know, I think, how many
Yeah, I would say in a reappraisal year, you're probably going to have it twice a month for the first few months.
for next year.
And then it kind of
Probably.
taper off toward the end.
Boy, that's not what Lisa told me when she asked me to be on the board.
Yeah, it can be more frequent. But also, you know, the expectations are they just have to be heard eventually. So ideally, we're going to hear them all before the end of the year. But, you know, like a few counties I won't name, they're still hearing last year's appeals now for real estate. You know, they had reappraisal last year. So you can still, as long as they're being heard, you're doing the right thing.
Are we required to all be here? I mean, I know ideally, but I just mean, can the meeting still be held if there's only 4 people? It can't.
Yeah,
right?
as long as you have
As long as
three,
you have
a
quorum.
quorum.
Oh, as long as you have 3.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
I
at
missed
least
that.
3.
Thank you.
Although it
So
gets a
okay.
little dicey when you have 2-2 votes.
Hmm.
Right. 'cause
That
so,
doesn't
yeah, you
pass.
need an odd number.
That means that whatever the motion is doesn't pass. But nonetheless, that's the only thing when you have 4 and you have an even number of people. But
Yep.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I am in favor of Mondays.
Mondays first
Yeah, I mean,
and
we could do,
Tuesday
like-
second.
Right. We probably, we could do like the first Monday and then add the third Monday if we need to or something. I don't know. For me
So-
personally, I'd rather meet more frequently for a shorter duration. I just mean 4 hours feels like,
well,
Like-
no. If you were only going to meet for 2 hours,
right.
and if that, I would think that if you're going to meet multiple times, yeah, you may not want to have 4-hour meetings,
Right.
but say that we're going to meet for 2 hours and try to get as much business done within those 2 hours as we can. But if you're only going to meet once a month, you probably are going to need to have a longer meeting
Yeah.
to get.
So
My
I-
preference would be every 2 weeks
2
for
hours. every
2
2
hours
weeks instead of-
each.
Yeah.
And then that gives people more time too, to
And
more than one option.
So I have
I
a
don't know.
I have a question because the appeals period it ends on the 16th of May.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
then would we start our meetings in June to give people a couple of weeks? Obviously, we skip the Memorial
Okay.
Day
Yeah.
holiday and then go
good.
into June to start.
That's a good
To
point.
give
Yeah,
folks
that's
time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We would do that. You'd set your schedule, and we have to have enough time to notify
Sure.
and the public.
know
And by
what
then,
the-
you're reaching into June. So
What the notification requirements were, but I knew at least probably 10 days for
10 days, I believe. It's 10 or 15.
I would need to specifically
Yeah.
look because this is it's not a, there's the public, there's the notice of the public meeting, but then there's more the due process of letting the appellant know
Mhm.
your case is going to be heard on this day. And so that we would need to clarify.
Yeah,
'cause I
we
don't
can get
know
that
the
clarification.
reason I was looking is
Yeah.
the June 9th date because the June 2nd would follow with Memorial Day.
Right.
So if we started on Monday the 9th, just generically at this point,
It's,
Do the
It's a
second and fourth.
well, it's a whole week. The 26th is Memorial Day. A whole week later,
yeah, okay. So we could do the second.
we could do the second.
Yeah, we'll nail down that timeline on dates. Again, I got my
It's
dates
good to
mixed
know
up.
that Mondays are
Look at my
good,
notes.
possibly Tuesdays. And always the afternoon.
That's really your call. I mean,
Yeah. We'll be here.
staff will be here and we will have a room for you.
We're here to
When
support you.
decide to meet, we're going to be here. So
I can be flexible. I do have other people to pick up my kids from school, but generally, oh no, this will be the summer.
Starting summer, yeah.
They're going
But
to be
it may
feral this
go-
summer. They don't need.
It could go into fall.
Well, they'll still be in school.
They won't be
June
at school this.
June 2nd.
Mm-mm, no, they'll be out. So sorry. I was just thinking my preference was going to be noon to noon to
to
2 or noon to 2:30 or something, but it's gonna be a free for all in the summer, so never mind. No restrictions. But yeah, afternoon might be good. If we're meeting on Mondays, we'll have the supporting documents the week before.
That would be the idea.
That ideally, I was just thinking if we're meeting on Mondays, we won't have that day grace.
Well,
period to-
what we would probably do is say that we would need your documents in the week before, so that Monday, so then you would have the rest of the weekend, the weekend before the hearing. Not that we want you to be, killing yourself over this, but we would want to at least give you a week with the documents so you can review them if that's what you choose to do.
Okay, great. Yeah, okay, cool.
So if we did choose Monday, the first Monday
So we're thinking first and third.
of the month, it would be the day before the commissioners meet.
But that
It
doesn't,
really.
that's not really a bit, the only thing I would be thinking of is you don't want staff conflicts
Right.
where, somebody, let's say me, would need to be in two places at one time. That,
It's hard to do.
but that's the only thing that I think we would, because I know that the Cape team that runs and does some of the AV and all that, they have
Yeah.
multiple meetings. We just don't want to have these quasi judicial
Yeah.
meetings or large board meetings happening at the same time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, my gut tells me we should stick away from just that week. If you do the Monday and Tuesday, definitely Tuesday, do it the following week of the
Yeah,
second
if
and
you were
fourth
going to do
week.
it Tuesdays, I would do the second and fourth Tuesday so you don't conflict with the commissioner meetings.
Right.
But Mondays, I think you can do it the first and third.
Yeah, first and third,
And,
second
and
fourth.
that.
Yeah.
And
June
then
2nd
just set a
and
time
16th.
and then just let us know what time and we'll,
Make it happen.
All right.
Sounds like a plan.
We're on
Is that
that. Now, just touching back on the rule scenario, what can we do with this, Kurt? 'Cause we don't want to deliberate about this via email or
well,
anything like
I could
that.
come up with, I did send staff a copy of the rules of procedures that we use for the Board of Adjustment. I am happy, but those also have some things that are specific to the Board of Adjustment that you all wouldn't deal with. I would be happy to try to get you some type of proposed rules for you all to look at. And then I guess we could discuss at if we're going to have another meeting.
It would be the
The 16th.
adjourn date.
But then we could discuss on the 16th. And if that would work for you, I'd be happy to get that. And I'll try to get that to you sooner rather than later. So,
And if there are other scenarios, I mean, even as we go through the year where you all think, maybe we should talk about, deliberate some other rules. Obviously, once you open the date for this year, you probably need to discuss it for the following. But before you hear any of those late listing appeals, because that's really the ones that the manual talks about. That's why I brought it up now before you hear any of them. So before you hear any of them, I just felt like it'd be a good idea.
You're
for you
going to want
have a rule.
to have, I mean, the rules of procedure, those are a little different than like actual like rules about whether something's going to be granted or denied more. So those are two different things. The rules of procedure, a majority of you can amend at any time or suspend your rules should you need to. So those are a little bit different than like a rule that, we will not approve any late penalty waivers unless the following has been established. And then we would, have certain things. So those would be two different things. But I agree with Eric that you would want that rule ahead of people filing appeals on late. When is that deadline? Do you know? Or has it already happened?
March 15th, if you filed for an extension and you didn't submit by then. And then January 31st is the
Okay.
original.
So that's already kind of in play anyway.
It is. Yeah. So we would know how many there are, but I don't know how many appeals have occurred yet. So they have plenty of time still to appeal. We're sending out, not many counties do this, but we actually send out notices of value to our local businesses. so that they have another appeal period there too. So we're trying to be flexible. Also, it's to help with the lien situation for a lot of local
I'll
businesses.
be happy to let you know that those have been sent and received.
All right.
So thank you for that.
So as we work them,
Yeah, it's working.
folks will see them. So yeah, call our office if you have any questions.
Yeah, I wonder who to call.
Yeah, Raina, you know Raina. Okay, but that's all I had on that agenda item. Does anybody have anything else? Anything else anybody wants to talk about?
So when is our next, have we
16th.
scheduled?
The 16th of May,
Of May.
1
Friday,
o'clock.
Friday.
I think it'll still be here.
Hmm?
I think it'll still be here. So we'll have
Still
to.
be here?
I think so.
Oh, okay.
I don't know that for certain,
The
but
building will still be here?
it does by then. Oh, and it's at the other building. So it'll be a similar setup. Appellants do have an opportunity to drop appeals off in person, but I've never seen that happen. So we'll make sure that it's properly noticed in there's flyers.
And what are
things
we
like that.
doing on the 16th? What does that mean?
Just adjourning the closing the formal appeal period.
That's it.
And if there's any other items on the agenda, like approving minutes, voting on what we've talked about
On the
here.
rules.
Yeah, that's it. No hearings.
And probably set our dates for the for
Yes.
June.
Yeah. So even if we're not set up for a boardroom over there, we do have a couple of Microsoft Teams rooms that we can have these meetings. So we can figure it out.
All right.
It's over to you all.
I don't
Anything
have
else
anything
we want to talk
else.
about before we adjourn?
If not, I make a motion that the meeting be adjourned.
Got a
Second.
motion? Got a second? All those in favor, raise your hand. We got it. Unanimous?